you have a background. You talked about your sailing. You were also a dive instructor, were you not? Or a dive master? And you fly planes. So you're quite the action man yourself.
Yeah, Action Man Dan.
Well, in my youth, I was not afraid to get hurt. The older I get, the more I fear.
Welcome to the Two Authors Podcast, an entertaining chat show hosted by best-selling mystery and thriller authors Douglas Pratt and Nicholas Harvey, in lively, humorous and informative conversation with distinguished guests who share their thoughts and experience about forging a successful author career.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. And Doug coming to us from his boat, not in a hurricane this time.
Not in a hurricane this time, no. It's very beautiful, actually, out. It's like 65, 70 degrees. Gorgeous weather, so.
Lovely. Well, I think this show is going to come out in January, so probably none of this will be true, but it's gorgeous in Islamorada. We went diving yesterday, and so weather good all around. So we've been going back and forth trying to get this guest on forever. He's a friend of both of ours. He's the best guy ever. His pen name is Cap Daniels. He and his lovely wife.
He writes the other Chase series.
The other Chase series.
The bigger Chase series.
The Chase Fulton series. He's uber successful thriller writer, and he's an absolute super guy. So we'll get to him in a minute. But first of all, we have a question from Gina in California. And she asks, creative first or business first in your day? How do you find a balance between the two?
I think that while it's creative, it is since it's our business, it is probably as important or more important than some of the business side of things. I mean, obviously you got to do the business stuff, but I would say I would probably put my creative first, depending on and it depends on where I am in the process of each book.
So you get up in the morning and the first thing you do is write.
I probably would jump into writing. Although, actually, I usually try to jump into editing first. So I guess I could still count that and then get that done.
Like going through what you wrote the prior day.
Yeah, and coming back at it. But then, like I said, it depends on the time of the month, time of the where I am in the book. If I'm in the middle of the book and in the good part, I'm going to plow through the book because the sooner I get the book done, I got more time to kind of do the business side of it and kind of getting straight. So how about you, sir?
Yeah, I lean towards creative first thing. I'm a bit of an early riser. So I tend to be more creative in the morning and I have a bit more energy in the morning. So I try and write. And then after I get to my word count, go on to the business side of things. But there's multiple things that derail that because I'm a spaz and I'm all over the place a lot of the time. So, but I try and pull myself back to the writing until I hit my word count and then work on the creative. But finding the balance, yeah, that's always a tricky one. Basically, for me,
it's a lot of back and forth, really, is what it is.
Well,
it's like running up one side and trying to get it back to the other side. Yeah.
Exactly. But I've got a word count I've got to hit to make my schedule. So depending on where I am in that week and how I'm doing on the word count. For an example, this morning, I have this idea for a shirt that'll support the new book that's coming out. It'll t-shirt design. So I spent 3 hours working on a t-shirt design this morning when I should have been writing. And then we got into recording. Then I looked up and it was almost time to record the podcast. And I went, oh shit, I forgot we're recording the podcast this morning. and I haven't written a word yet. So this afternoon's going to be busy writing.
That does kind of fall into, I mean, I kind of count that as creative. I've been working on a project that's not writing per se, but it is.
Well, this was certainly creative. Yeah.
So it does kind of fall that way. And I think that's kind of what I'm saying. I think sometimes it's a little bit of both. You have to count both. Because honestly, most of my payouts and in the advertising and stuff like that is automated for the most part. And I'd go in and create ads. That's a whole ordeal. So that takes a little bit of time, but you got to focus on that. So,
all right, let's move on to our guest this week. So again, it's Cap Daniels, whose 29th book in the Chase Fulton series will be out, I believe, before the end of the year. And he's had huge success with that series. He also has his Russian spy thriller series that is a spin-off of that, which is 7th book will come out next year. It's the 7 Deadly Sins series. They're both fantastic. So let's chat with Dan. Cap Daniels, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. We've been wanting to do this for a long time, and my schedule has prevented it until now, and I'm thrilled to be with you guys.
Well, thank you. Thanks for making the time. And start off by giving our listeners a little bit of background on how you got involved in writing and when you were first published.
Writing for me began in high school. I wrote a little piece that I thought was good enough to get a passing grade in English, and the teacher asked me to stay after class to discuss it. And, I was terrified at that point. She was very encouraging and very complimentary about the writing, and she said, "You should do this more, even when no one else reads it." And that has sort of been a mantra for me since I was 14 or 15 years old. I should write, even if no one reads.
Even if no one reads it. That's a good point. I always write for myself to begin with. I write for myself first, and then for my wife second, and then after that, anyone else who likes to read it is just the perfect audience. So
exactly, we get to play with our imaginary friends every day, our characters, and that's a cool way to make a living.
I steal that line a lot, by the way. I do credit you for it, but I steal it a lot.
I probably stole it from someone, maybe Wayne. I don't know.
So how long have you been published then?
Published the first book in 2015 through a traditional publisher. Like most first-time writers, we write what we believe is the best story that can be told by any human ever on the planet. And then we submit it to 5,000 or 6,000 editors and publishers and agents. Well, I think if I kept track correctly, I submitted it to 283 different individuals. And I got a lot of no thank yous and a lot of ignores. I finally got 2 offers for a contract, and we selected one, and I hated absolutely everything about the process. They wanted me to do all the work and make 12.5% commissions, and that didn't seem fair to me. So I had a 3-year contract with them. I didn't publish anything during that 3-year contract other than that first initial book under another pen name that I'll never mention because that book was terrible. But 3 years after that, in 2018, we published the first Chase Fulton novel. And since then, we've published 36 more and loved everything about the self-publishing world. Melissa is a business major, understands accounting and the finance side of this, and I get to be creative while she turns what I make into royalty checks. And we get a little better than 12.5% now, as both of you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
they're brilliant.
That's my journey to get where we are, and it's been amazing. I wouldn't change a thing.
Great. And having Melissa working with you and helping with the business may partly explain the next question, which is, we know you're still working full time and you're putting out, 5-6 books a year? That is an incredible production rate.
We do 6 a year, but I've reached the point in my career where I'm old and they don't expect much of me anymore. So I get a lot of free time to do some writing. But no, Melissa is absolutely the backbone of the financial side of this business. Without her, I would just have a bunch of stories and notebooks that would be lying around on the desk somewhere.
That's also something that I just had this discussion at Author Nation with a couple of authors, and the big thing that came across was what was the big changing moment, and Jillian Dodd, who's been on our show before, said it's the minute I decided to look at it as a business, not as a hobby, not as just something I'm doing. This is a business. So, and I think that makes a huge difference in your success, is if you can look at what's the business decision on what we're writing and what we're choosing to do. So,
absolutely. And Melissa's been such an integral part of that. I'm a bit of a free spirit and a wild heart, I suppose we would say, and I will run off on crazy tangents, but she does a wonderful job of keeping me inside the margins, not offending the readership. It's so easy to get something wrong that will just tick off too many people and they put your books down and stop reading. She's a wonderful filter for that. I get to, again, play with my imaginary friends, but she gets to rein us in a little bit and keep us from going.
Usually, I say this a lot. Usually, my favorite note that my wife gives me, because she reads my books first, is she'll put a little note on the side that says "I roll" if I do something that's like a little bit ridiculous, and so that's always been my favorite note she gives me. So, which usually also means I'm going to go deeper on it. I'm going to go, well, if she thinks this an eye roll, then I'm going to go ahead and see what else I can do to.
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes I write those little offshoots just for me. So. And never show them to anyone.
Yeah. You know that's going to get taken out, but you got to put it in there.
Tell us a little bit how Cap Daniels kind of developed, because that is obviously a pen name. And so how did you go to putting on that cape, going from Dan Mason to Cap Daniels and choosing that?
As so many other things for which I give Melissa credit, she thought that would be a good idea, and she had some rules for that. There was another Daniel Mason on the West Coast writing fiction. He wrote The Piano Tuner. It is a more literary than what I write. It's not genre fiction by any means. I did not, in the early days, didn't want my name confused with his, because my writing was very different than his. And I was afraid that no one would ever really know who I was if I published under a name that was already in use. So we wrote down maybe 30 or 40 possible pen names. We liked the one syllable first name, 2-syllable last name. So we came up with a bunch of those. Then we went searching for .coms. Was the name available as a .com? If it was not, we scratched it off the list. If there was another writer using that name, we scratched it off the list. And we came down to 2 or 3, and we settled on Cap. I had been a sailing charter captain for years, and very, very many people called me Captain Dan. That morphed into Cap Daniels. The .com was available, and it was a nice little ring. It's easy to spell. No one else is using it. So that's how we got.
That's a brilliant fit. And you're back. I mean, you're writing thrillers with Chase Fulton running around in all boats, planes. I mean, it's anything that's action, moving related. He's up to it at some point in that series. You have a background. You talked about your sailing. You were also a dive instructor, were you not? Or a dive master? And you fly planes. So you're quite the action man yourself.
Yeah, Action Man Dan.
Well, in my youth, I was not afraid to get hurt. The older I get, the more I fear.
I have trouble getting out of bed sometimes. I'm like, oh my goodness.
If you sneeze and burp at the same time, I'm bedbound for a week. I started flying in the mid-'80s in the mountains of East Tennessee and learned to fly during my teenage years. So that's been my greatest material passion of my life was flight. And I discovered sailing not too long ago, 20 years or so, and learned that it is essentially flying with the wing pointed skyward. It's the same aerodynamics. The wing and the sail works exactly the same way. And I began to become fascinated with that. So those two are very complementary for each other. And I do dive. I've been a diver for years and owned a scuba shop for several years and taught somewhere around 3,000 students to dive in those in the year. We sold the business to another instructor, and he's doing extremely well, and we're very happy for him. But I'm so glad that I have a job now that I don't have to wash wetsuits at the end of the day.
Yeah, I like washing just my wetsuit, and that's it. I wouldn't want to wash everybody else's wetsuit because there's always the people that what's the story that there's two types of people who pee in their wetsuits and people who lie about it.
Exactly.
And that's a great feeling for the first 30 or 40 seconds.
Hey, it keeps you warm, right? So just jumping back to some of the flying thing, one of the things I saw you do right after Helene is you were flying in supplies to North Carolina, correct? I mean, that was some of the stuff you were doing there was pretty amazing.
I have a strong belief that when we are rewarded in life, it's our responsibility to share those rewards with others. There have been so many times in my life that maybe I didn't have bread for a sandwich and someone would feed me, or I couldn't make the light bill and someone would miraculously show up and make that happen. We've reached the point in our life now, thankful to a few million wonderful readers, that we can share some things that we couldn't in our younger life. And those people were in such a desperate situation.
Yeah, that was pretty impressive. I think that was awesome that you were doing that. It was I was amazed. I mean, that was just all the things that happened around that anyway. It was pretty amazing seeing people carrying supplies up on donkeys into the mountains and people doing airdrops. It was pretty impressive. So
it was fascinating. And there's nothing funny about it, but I had a funny moment during that process. I carried a 50-pound bag of goat food. And I have no idea why we would ship goat food to the mountains of North Carolina. Goats will eat anything. But
That's true.
So I carried this 50-pound bag of Purina goat food to a mountain on the side of a mountain in western North Carolina.
One of the things that you said, and we talked about this at NINC, and you write every day, which I think is, I think we all kind of do that pretty much. But you made a comment. What is it that we don't? I think you said they don't call us writers because we wrote. Which I was like, that was a great line. So, like, what's your kind of goal, your daily goal for writing?
3,000 words is my typical daily goal, and I most often make that. My chapters are 2,200 to 2,500 words, so I typically get a chapter and a start for the next chapter every day is sort of the goal that I shoot for. And sometimes the chapters run long, and I'll run off down a rabbit trail and have to delete. And both of you understand how that works. We write paragraph after paragraph that we end up deleting. But 3,000 words a day is my general goal. It began as 1,000 when I first started writing, and that seemed...
That's Wayne's goal.
Yep, Wayne Stinnett, the great Wayne Stinnett, who was so influential in my early career, he suggested 1,000 words a day, and that seemed insurmountable. There's no way I can write that much.
What's your process for it? Do you just sit down and just straight write? Do you do like I write for 15 minutes and I go, pee because I have to, get a cup of coffee, or is it?
As schizophrenic as this sounds, I write when the voices come. I don't plan anything. I have no outline. I have no idea where the story's going, how it will end, or even what the next sentence will be. I sit on the end of our couch with the laptop in my lap and write what the movie playing in my head portrays. Comes out of my fingertips, and that becomes the stories. I don't change much from that. Most writers have a first draft, second draft, final draft process, and I don't do that. My first draft is the book that is very close to what gets published.
So very much like the writing in the dark kind of thing. You just kind of go into it, and then what comes out is what it is. So I'm kind of the same way. I do a little bit of outlining, but not as much as Nick does. But sometimes I just go a whole book straight through as pure pantsing, and it's.
And please don't think I'm claiming to be some sort of savant. I'm kind of like the elephant who holds a paintbrush in his tusk or in his trunk. He has no idea what he's doing. He's just having a good time, and that's what I do every day. Just hold a paintbrush in my nose and have fun.
So I have a question that's always, I'm halfway between a pantser and a plotter. I have to lay out certain elements, not always in the same way or as far forward, or it can be bits of the story throughout, but I have to have something up ahead a little bit. And so as a pure pantser, as you start laying down your story and you're a third of the way in, you're dropping breadcrumbs in there for something that's going to happen later. So you have to build some kind of either squirrel them away and know you've got to get back to them. How do you keep up with all of that stuff? You just keep it in your head and hope you connect the dots at the end?
I make notes of obscure things that happen along the way because I have no idea what those breadcrumbs are going to turn into. I know it sounds crazy, but every pantser does that. Perhaps we are planning ahead and don't realize we are. But when those strange little breadcrumbs show up, I had a break-in at several airplanes to plant some listening devices and a break-in at the office at the airport where Chase Fulton flies from. And I had no idea where that was going. I had no clue who did it or why. And it came up very near the epilogue of that particular story that it explained it. But I found it fascinating that, that worked out pretty well. But I do have those stumbling blocks that come up. And I'm sure both of you use beta readers as well. And they find a lot of those little breadcrumbs I left that I didn't close. So when they find them, I will often go back and remove the breadcrumb or do a rewrite to cover that breadcrumb later.
Right. Explain it. Gotcha. So with this long series, and you started it back in 2018 with Chase, did you plan an arc for him in any way? Or did you write the first one and then go, okay, where are we going from here?
The first book was a standalone novel. Everyone died in the end. All of the main characters, most of the supporting characters died in a terrible sea battle off Isla Morada, where you are. And at the end of the book, it was 132,000 words was the manuscript I wrote for that. I believed it was a good book, found a good editor, sent it to her, and she said, well, we're going to chop about 40,000 words, and you're going to write book 2. Everyone stays alive, and this becomes a series. I thought, well, that's ridiculous. I killed everyone. I have no idea what to do next. She said, doesn't matter. Sit down and do it. And so that became book 2. And then she said, see, I told you. Now write book 3. And I began book 29 in that series last week.
So now, as you're into the series, do you pick something with Chase that you project out through books, or not at all?
Melissa came up with a wonderful idea. At the time, it was how to end Chase's series, but it has since morphed into an idea of how to transform Chase's series so it can continue when he gets too old to still kill people and blow things up. So it's a magnificent thing that I would have never come up with. So I've written that little transition now, and that will become the end of book, 60 or 70 or something, and then the series will transition into something a little bit new. I had originally thought we would write about 30 books in Chase's series, but now that we're at book 29, I'm not halfway finished telling his story.
Yeah, you told that. Okay. So as a pantser, this is something that we get asked a lot. So how do you deal with when days you're not really feeling it, or your voices don't talk, or you feel like you got writer's block? What is your technique for kind of getting past that and pushing through?
This is my favorite question. We do a lot of teaching and a lot of helping of young writers, very much like Don Lee McKenna and Wayne Stennett did for me in the early days. And I've helped you guys as well. They are wonderful parts of our community. I tick a lot of people off with the following phrase: there is no such thing as writer's block.
I would agree with you. I would agree. Yeah, we both agree. It's always nice to hear other people say.
That makes procrastinators furious, and they want to throw sharp things at me. If we had writer's block, we couldn't write anything. We couldn't write a grocery list. We couldn't write what we're going to watch TV that night. I sit down and write anything. It could be gibberish. It means nothing. But I am not a blocked writer. I'm a writer incapable of writing what I want to write today. So I write something because, as you mentioned earlier, we are not writers because we have written. We are writers because we do write. And I write every day, regardless of whether or not that becomes part of a story. So I kick over those blocks that get in the writer's way by writing whatever comes. And then I'll focus on the story once those gears start turning again, and I can write what I want to.
So do you do anything that helps generate that creative flow? Like, I mean, like I could see for me, sometimes it's just, if I get to a point in the story where I'm stuck, two of the things that I do that help me is I might get on the tractor and go bush hog because nobody bothers me and I'm just sitting there bush hogging. Or I might be, there have been times when we've been doing a road trip and Ashley will fall asleep and I'm just driving and it's by myself and my brain just can work through the problems. How about you? Maybe is it flying, or is it anything that might allow you to work through this?
I've written a lot of books while flying. In my head, of course, I don't hold the laptop while I'm in patrols. But in cruise flight, there's not a lot to do, or systems monitors at that point. The autopilot's managing most of the flight, so I can do a lot of thinking. And I have written the endings to many books underwater, several off Key Largo. That's such an inspiring place for me. The reefs there are just breathtakingly beautiful, and it's so peaceful and serene. I taught diving for so many years that I had to babysit 8 or 10 divers at a time. And now when we dive for fun, I don't have to worry about everyone else. I'm not hurting cats. I can relax and enjoy the silence and the break. Also, Jack Daniels and Cuban cigars are wonderful.
That's fair.
So I mentioned it before we got on the air. To me, you are the absolute king of consistency when I look at what you've built. It may not feel it from your side, but from the other side of it, and I'm sure from your reader's side, right from the get-go in the Chase Fulton series, you have been consistent. Everything looks the same. You're giving them, I think somebody said, and I'm paraphrasing, if they order cake, don't give them steak, or vice versa. So is there a check and balance? Is her name Melissa? And to keep that,
I believe that the answer is yes. Her name is Melissa. So.
To keep a consistency and also to come up with something new in that long series, right? Because I mean, you've kind of, it's hard to keep coming up with situations to put Chase in, yeah?
Sure. That consistency is, I have to give credit to a wonderful editor I found very early on in this. Didn't really know how to write correctly. I learned 7 or 8 books into this process that there are rules about writing fiction. I had no idea there were rules.
Yeah, I've been told that there's some. I haven't found them yet.
I was following many of those rules that I didn't know existed. But the ones that I didn't follow, she taught me to follow. And she has become a great influence in how and what I write. It took us about, 2.5 months to edit the first book. And now it takes us about 10 days to edit one because I write the way she taught me to write. Much more correctly, much more concisely, much more consistently. And it makes her job easier, makes it possible to put out more books, and makes my job a lot easier as a writer. We have a standard to go by. Of course, the Chicago Manual of Style is all of our writers' Bibles. We have to adhere to that for the most part. But developing that technique and sticking with it. Michael Jordan did it. Simple dribbling, shooting, and dodging other players. He did that a billion times in a career and made a lot of money and scored a lot of goals. And that's what we have to do, I believe, is follow those fundamentals, those basic things that make us good, solid writers.
And this is one of the things I've said. I think most of our readers, and we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier on as our demographic, but most of our readers want kind of the same thing. They like both of our Chase series. They want them to be Chase, right? They don't want them to be. They don't want you coming in here and writing. I want to do a James Patterson Cross book instead of a Chase. But I think that's part of it. Is they want that consistency in the storyline as well. They want my Chase to kill things and blow things up. They want your Chase to kill things and blow things up. They want Nora to go around and be snarky all the time, right? And so,
she's the best.
And break a rule or two.
And they don't want us to suddenly make a big change, which kind of lowers the arc, but keeps us giving them the same content. So what about, like, you talk about working with your editor, do you plan some of these stories ahead of time with your editor, or do you and Melissa just talk about it, or do you just sit there and come up with it and let her see it and stuff?
Our typical process is I will write for the day. In the evening when we sit down after dinner, I will read what I've written that day to Melissa, and she will tell me the parts that may need a little work, and we'll discuss some of the choices I made, and maybe change some of those together. Melissa taught me to write dialogue. We're men. We have no idea what goes on inside a woman's head. So when I try to write female dialogue, it was garbage, like most of us when we first began this. But she taught me to not think like a woman, God forbid. Who knows what would happen? My hair would fall out or something.
Hey, you have the same gorgeous hair that I have. So Nick is jealous of the sexy look that we pull off. So
if I looked as good as Nick, I would never wear a hat. People would just
I love his author pick that's got that flowing locks. I'm like, dude, just, you can let that go back out.
He's a pretty man. We can't fight it.
And that accent, oh man, yeah, he could be a Chippendale model for that kind of
I
thing.
think he's faking that. He's from Kentucky originally. I believe he's faking the British thing. He drives really fast, though.
Okay, getting away from me. I'm back on track. Your covers are another thing. When I talk about king of consistency, you came up with a cover design, or you had someone come up with a cover design. And I want to know what influence you guys had on this, because you chose a monotone theme and you've stuck with it. And the images, match the genre you're in, but the color scheme was slightly different in that monotone look. It was not, at the time, it wasn't what was going on. Today, it's not what's going on. But if you see a Cap Daniels book, you go, that's a Chase Fulton book, right? Cap Daniels right there. I think it's brilliance. In fact, we've copied it. We've copied the idea for our Missing in the Keys, Green Wolf series. So we just did red instead of orange. But how did that come about? How did that all develop?
I've never mentioned this person before, but my wife, Melissa. So, believe it or not, we went to Barnes & Noble one afternoon with a notebook. We must have looked at 500 book covers and wrote down what we loved, what we hated, what we didn't. And she is a branding wizard. She had that same theory that if someone sees a book, they should immediately be able to recognize it as a Cap Daniels book. So she came up with the sunset orange and the brown color scheme, and it has become our standard. So that's the choices we made early on. We wanted Melissa wanted a consistent brand that I wasn't smart enough to understand, and she made it happen. We have a wonderful cover designer in Germany. She's actually in Austria. She's a German native, but she's a magnificent cover designer. We found her on Fiverr, and she is inexpensive and incredibly fast and does beautiful work. We typically pick or choose a photograph, send to her, and give her a rough idea of what we want, and 3 days later, those come back. When everyone is reading ebooks now, many readers never see our covers. They buy the books and immediately flip to page one. But I still love, as you can see behind me, I love a shelf of.
Well, and you're talking. It's interesting because I've done the same thing, going to Barnes and Noble and kind of looking at what all the covers are in it, and there's a vast difference between like what traditionally publishers put out versus what some of the indies do. And indies, I think, really kill it with covers. Like, we really go out of our way to. I mean, most good, successful indies. There's plenty of people who are using paint.
We all have a good friend, David Behrens. He does some of the most beautiful covers.
He's really killing it now. I've started using him for my AJ series, and I'm so happy I did. And actually, he's done some mock-ups for a new series that I'm doing, and I love him. I'm not sure it's the we'll see if we end up using that style or I get him to do something else, but I love what he's put together.
I saw a page of his covers recently, and there must have been, 100 or more covers on that page. And it was beautiful work, but it wasn't identifiably as his. He is so broad.
He's across the board. Yeah, it is. He does a really good job of everything. Like, he can do cozy covers. He's done sci-fi covers. He's done it all, I think. So he does a great job. So.
Yeah, it's very true. I was worried about it when I went to him. I'm like, okay, can you pull yourself out of the lightning in the sky and this stuff and go here? And I gave him some samples and we talked about it. And he's so communicative. You can chat with him and talk about it, which has been something I like to do with the cover designers and have probably to the detriment putting my oar in. Okay, so a question we ask everybody who comes on the show here, Cap, is what do you feel is your author superpower? Whether it's the business side, writing side, whatever side of it, whatever aspect.
And I'm just going to bet you're going to say Melissa, but let's see.
We accept Melissa is the weapon of choice you have in your stable, but what's your personal superpower?
Making readers have an emotional experience they did not expect. That's always my number one goal in storytelling. I want them to cry. I want them to hate me and the characters. I want them to love me and the characters. I want them to be afraid. I want them to gasp. I want them to not be able to lay that book down. And if I can create that emotional reaction they did not choose, then that to me is victory, regardless of ever receiving a royalty check. That's how I win as a writer.
And is Melissa your first level gauge of whether you've done that when you give her? Do you sit there and watch her reading it to see what her reaction is?
I actually read to her. in Chase's voice, which coincidentally sounds a lot like mine.
Sounds a lot like this.
Exactly.
It's a shame. You need to be a little falsetto next time, maybe.
Sometimes she will read the material that I've written without me being around, and she will find stumbling blocks in the sentence structure or in the paragraph structure that makes perfect sense to me because I wrote it, but it may not to a reader.
That's how I use my wife too. Ashley reads it first and then gives me the feedback. And I find you brave because I won't watch her read it because I wait for her to like look up at me and give me the physical eye roll, not just the mental note that says eye roll. So, but I do slide like, plus when I write, I often slide a joke in solely for her. And that way no one else will get it. But and that always makes me happy when she kind of gives me a laughing note or something like that. So
hiding little tidbits in there is so much fun. And it's kind of a guilty pleasure of mine. People who I know well or I've worked with in the past will slide in little inside jokes that none of the readers get except maybe one person. And I love those. That's fun to do.
It's fun to do something where you're 29 books in. So you pull something that was back in like book 5 or something, a little, passing comment or a character that goes by. And it's great when a reader points out, hey, that was cool. It's like, dang, I could barely remember back book 5. I don't know how you did.
Hey man, yeah. In fact, we were just talking about, I was doing a project with a character from the first book. I was just referring back. I was like, I can't remember his last name. And luckily I had that book sitting on the shelf on the boat because I don't have all my stuff here. And Ashley went over and got it. And we looked it up. I was like, yeah, there it is. That's it. Yes, I remember now. But so a real quick question to jump back. I know before we finish our last question, but with 29 books, do you treat them like my Chase? I try to treat mostly like standalones. Can anybody jump in at any point, or do you have some jumping in points for your books?
That's the biggest mistake I've made in that series. They need to be read in order to be understood. And some of the, some of the spoilers. If you started with book 25, you're going to know things that happened along the way that would have been exciting and unrevealed prior to that. I wish I were a better writer in the beginning so that I wouldn't have made them so linear. I wish I had made them more like standalone novels. It's very linear. That particular series is. When I write other things, I probably will. I almost said I probably will not make that same mistake, but I will try not to make that same mistake.
All right. So we have one final question. We have our wheel of questions. You had traveled to the boat with me, and it fell apart. So we did some repairs. So but I broke it. It was traveling, but. Okay, so we talked about your superpower. What do you think is your kryptonite then, in retrospect? What would be your weakness that you've got to work on?
Distractions. I will very often start to research something, and the next thing I know, I'm watching cat videos on YouTube.
I think men generally are golden retrievers.
What?
Oh, exactly.
Squirrel. Yeah. That's Nick and I. We joke all the time about whatever our daily rabbit hole is that we fall into. And it's usually, it could be marketing. It could be anything, but we're suddenly engrossed in that when we should be like putting words on the paper. So
this has been brilliant. I'm so glad we got to make this happen and get you there. And it's lovely that Melissa got to sit next to you and we got to hear her giggle at you every once in a while. So we love you guys. Thank you so much. I'm going to give you a shout out as well. You talked about giving back. You have been so generous with your time and information for starting authors. I know you helped me out a whole bunch and you've always answered any questions I had. So you certainly pay it forward and you live in that ethos. So thank you so much for all of that. And thanks for joining us on the show. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's been terrific.
They are such good people.
Aren't they, though? They're great.
Friendliest guy in the world. Well, they both are super friendly and super supportive. I blew some smoke up his backside, but it's the truth. He really was, anything I asked, he had an answer for. Hey, try this. Hey, talk to that, go there. When I first started, and he had no reason, he probably gets, I'm probably one of, 50 people that approach him during the year. So.
Oh, he even said to me, we were talking, I think maybe at Nink or maybe before that, we don't think of ourselves as competitors. Like that's the whole beauty of this industry is, somebody's going to read his book. They're going to try and read my book. And again, I've said this before, I think, and my favorite review is someone said that, Cap Daniels should sue him for ripping off his Chase series. But
That's a
yeah,
compliment.
it is a compliment. It's a great. I think that's the whole thing. And I think the big thing you can take away from what he says is he writes every day. And he said that at Nink while we were there. You go out and you write. It doesn't matter what. And I think if you're looking to write books and wanting to put out books, that you can. And we talked a little bit about this off the air, but like there's a lot of people who like the idea of being a writer and want to write books, but they don't want to sit down and do it. And the easiest way to do that is just to write every day.
Yeah, good, bad. Some of it you're going to use, some of it you're not going to use. And word count, we've talked about it on the show before, where it's really easy to get caught up in word count. And one man's floor is another man's ceiling. What I can produce in word count in a day is not the same as other people can produce. And I produce, but people often say, hey, you're prolific because I put out 5 books a year. Not in my world. Look at these people putting out book a month, or more.
No, not even close. Yeah. I talked to people that last week who were putting out 3 books a month, and I'm like, holy cow. And I mean, they're not doing it. They're not using anything, but they just write a lot.
And they write fast. And stream of consciousness write fast. And I can't do it. I think my best day ever was like 7,600 words in a day. And I wrote for a very long time during that day. It was when all the story had pulled together. It's the final. And I always find that, and you get to the end of the book and you know absolutely everything that's happening and the way it's wrapping up, and you just pour words out and you're able to do a lot more. But what I found is a system, and again, we touched on it on the show before, so forgive me if you've heard it, but I do a weekly target, which breaks into a daily target. So if I'm going to write 5 days a week, 2,000 words a day, that's 10,000 words a week. And that's the way I build my writing schedule for the year, is doing that. And by having a weekly target, if I have a slow day, I know I've got days I can make it up. And I know I've got 2 extra days on the weekend. And I end up using those. And like right now, I'm trying to get ahead on a project. So last week I did about 14,000 words in the week. Actually, a little bit more. I think I did 15,000 last week. So it was a productive week and I'm getting myself ahead. But there's room to do that. But you know what? Write 500 words a day. Write 1,000. 1,000 words a day is a lot of words. It's 365,000 words a year.
Terry Pratchett was famous for, he only wrote 500 words a day. He was super prolific. He wrote tons of books. If you don't know who Terry Pratchett is, go read his stuff. He's brilliant. But if you do 1,000 words a day, which isn't hard, and there's lots of ways to sit down and focus that, then you have 365,000 words a year. You break that up into, even at 100,000 words per book, you're looking at 3.5 books a year that you can put out. So, that it's easy to do. You just have to do it, and it does take focus. And like Cap says, I don't really believe in writer's block either. I think it's just procrastination. And not that I don't procrastinate. It's all mindset. I think that's the thing we preach on here all the time, is it's all about mindset. And if you don't have that mindset, then that's okay.
Some days it's everything you want writing to be, where it's just this incredibly creative expression that you're putting down. And then some days it's work. Some days you just don't quite feel it and it's work, and you just have to put something down there. Skip ahead, do a chapter ahead that you really have in your mind. Or if you're planning on doing a bonus chapter that's going to be about one character, write that now, and then come back when you're feeling it. But there's lots of ways to get around it. All right. Great show. Thanks again, Dan Mason. Cap Daniels, as you'll find his name on his books, and his lovely wife, Melissa. It's a pleasure having him join us. So check out the show notes. We'll have his links to Cap Daniels' social media and where to buy his books on Amazon, as well as our stuff, social media, and look for new episodes every 2 weeks. So until next time, be cool to each other.
Fair winds and following sea.
You've been listening to the Two Authors podcast with Nicholas Harvey and Douglas Pratt. Subscribe on your favorite platform for alerts on new shows coming every 2 weeks.